if we are seeing, this is the big picture of what happened in the last years, in the last 10 years in Chile. In the last 10 years in Chile, we are not increasing our fruits and vegetable consumption, we're decreasing it, which doesn't make sense for certain people because say, well, you are such a export country that send fresh fruits for every corner in the planet. How is possible that people in the country, they are not eating enough fruits? Yeah, and even that, there are people who are eating less fruit. And we start doing that and we start checking the numbers. And even we have people who are stopping buying fruits. So they are not buying. We have plenty zeros in our database, or plenty periods, if you want to call it, yeah? So that, from a public point of view, brings certain alarms and say, well, we have to find out what happened there. Just to give a big picture of this, we are talking about that people in Chile eat something close to 3.9 portions per person per day, which in our minimum target is 5 portions per day. So we are 20% under the minimum target. Now, I like to bring them attention, and is one of my main topics that I'm planning to talk this afternoon, is talking about something that say FAO. FAO talk about the food security is when a household have access to physical and to the economic access to all the healthy foods that they want to have. Put it in a very simple word. Yeah. What are the key terms here that we'll be talking this afternoon? One is the physical access, and the other one is the heavy economical access. What mean physical access? That they are able to reach the selling point easily. Okay. And what is the economic access? That they are able to afford that fruit and vegetable. Yeah. Now, just showing what happened in Chile. In Chile happened that here we have that the 20% of the lowest 20% income of the country, which is the quintile 1, okay, most of the fruits and vegetable purchase are done in our farmers market. When I mean farmers market, are not just the place where the farmers sell. There are cases that people buy large amount of fruit and vegetables and they'll sell it in tiny quantities, okay? Most of the low-income household buy fruit and vegetable there, and the prices there are much cheaper. Yeah. Now, the high-income families, most of the fruit and vegetable here we see is the quantile 5, should be. It is actually missing the 5. 50% of the fruits and vegetable purchase are in supermarket. What is the big difference on that? That the fruits and vegetable purchase in the supermarket are under control. I mean that the supermarket supervise strictly what are the fruits and vegetables that they are sold in their shelf. Yeah, so that's actually make a huge difference, but the price of fruits and vegetables are much higher in the supermarket. Now, that is one aspect that has to be with the physical access. Now, if we go to the economical access, what happened? Economical access show that here we have every bar talk about 10% income of the country. So we are going from the lowest 10% to the highest 10%. And with the red mean that they are able to afford. And what mean that is something close to a third of the country is not able to afford healthy food. Okay? It's a third of the country. Now we say, well, it seems a huge amount of number, is a huge number. Yeah, well, it's a big number, but if we see what are the numbers in terms of obesity of the country are much higher. we are talking about obesity. We have 30% of obesity and 40% of people overweight. So that actually means it is not just the price that is leading this phenomenon. But this is historical. Now, what is the point? What is the new point that I'm planning to talk here today? I'm planning to talk that FAO is missing a third key aspect, that is the having what is the mental access. Mental access is having the brain ready to eat more fruits and vegetables. Okay, mental access, from my point of view, I am arguing this afternoon, is a key aspect that needs to be taken into account. What is the picture? The picture is a fruit and vegetable seller. Yeah, and we have the possibility in Chile to work with the certain data, have a survey that getting data from fruits and vegetable seller. I'm not talking about the people who are buying those fruits. I'm talking the people who are selling the fruits. Why those people are key for us? Because if I am someone that have a tiny store where I sell fruits and vegetables, well, I may be able to eat easily. It's not a barrier. There is not an economical barrier. There is not a physical barrier to eat all the apples that I really want to eat. So we actually have a survey. We have a survey doing that, and we ask them, what is the quantity that you eat of your own fruits? We actually have also, for instance, data, and we say, okay, what is the weight of those people, of fruits and vegetable sellers? And we find out here that the fruit and vegetable seller have a weight 6.2 kilograms. So we can say twice in order to, if we put it in pounds, yeah, very roughly, okay? So have 12 pounds more than the people of the country. So they are selling fruits and they weigh more than the average people of the country, yeah? With the fruit and vegetables, we ask them, and they don't eat more than the rest of people of the country. They eat less. And with the BMI, they also have a BMI which is higher. So we say, well, in terms of exercise, they actually do more exercise than the average person of the country. How is possible that? Well, they have to take boxes with the fruit from one side to the other side. So they are practicing more exercise, but they weight more. Yeah. Now we say, well, what happened with the education? They say, well, this is comparing with the full country. Now, what happened with the low education people? If we compare the fruit and vegetable sellers with the rest of the country. Sorry, we compare the fruit and vegetable sellers just with the low educated people in the country, and we don't find difference. So what is the conclusion here? They eat fruit and vegetable in a similar way that the people from the same level of education, even if they have free access to fruit and vegetables. Yeah. Now, this comes from an other survey that we have been done in four countries. Yes. And in our survey, what we ask, okay, we first ask, what is the quantity of fruits and vegetables that people eat? And after that, we say, are you happy with that? Are you satisfied with that? And big surprise for us. 71% say, yeah, I'm happy. And you know what? We have 75% of people say, and we really see that they are eating less than 5 a day. So they are not eating enough food, enough fruits and vegetables, but they are happy with that. So even if we put in the fruit there, maybe it is not likely to eat them because they are happy with that, with the current consumption, which make us to switch what is the way that we should be doing this. Because now we need to find out ways that people feel hungry to eat more fruits and vegetables, because it seems that they are not eating enough, but they are happy with that. And finally, something else that also hit us was, well, we talk about people who are decreasing the consumption. There are people who are 84 people that were lower consumption. We say, well, what is the reason? Because you are not eating much fruit as you used to be eating. Price, say, is the economic barrier, are way too expensive. And then we ask them, well, and when you choose fruits, what are the reasons because you choose fruit? What are the main drivers that make you choose fruit? And news for us, they were not saying price. They were saying it is convenient, health concerns, and flavor. So it seems that for us, they are overstated at a certain point that the price, it is the cause of all our troubles, when it's maybe the case in certain cases, but it may be the case that is not the case in other cases. And finally, this is, someone knows here what is the most purchased fruit in Chile and in the planet as well. Just a big hint. Bananas. Thank you. Bananas. And we start asking about bananas. Since I am more in the quantitative work, but I like to do some qualitative work. Yeah. So we did focus groups. Yeah, we did some focus group and we asked people, what is your favorite fruit and all those kind of, and after that we asked people, say, why people love bananas? Why you love bananas? What is the big thing about bananas? What do we think? What we found? People think that the bananas are easy to eat, are healthy. People say, talking about that they have the vitamins that are good for health. Yes. No one mentioned price, and even in my country, it's not the cheapest fruit, and it's the most purchased fruit. And they say that it is a fruit of the lazy. People who are selling bananas say, you know what? People enter to our store and say, and our first question is, do you have bananas? So it seems that it's a hook for the rest of the fruits and vegetables consumption. What was also new for us, interesting way to see it. So my final slide is, I have been found in previous research that there is not clear, it's not clear how to connect food dessert, okay, with the other variables, so outcome variables in terms of health. So it is not easy to connect that. And maybe it's because we are not taking into account mental access, which mental access may be changing why certain groups are not consuming all the fruits and vegetables that we want them to consume. Thank you.
Stay there for questions. So
yeah.
Anybody have a question for Andres?
I was wondering, at least in this country, we think of when people go to a vegetable stand that prices are usually higher, and that the lower income people are shopping in the less expensive market. What extent do people, low income people who are shopping at these farmers markets for fruits and vegetables, how does that apply to other foods that they buy? Are we shopping in the same way? Does shopping frequency have any effect on?
Yeah, what's happened is, in our case, we have fairs, something called that is a fair. A fair is in the low income areas. Our fairs are certain days during the week. Okay, they install these fairs. Okay, and in this fair you can buy everything. Is the mall for the low income areas, so you can buy fruits and vegetables, but also things for the home, toilet paper, and whatever you want. Yeah, and they're huge. Huge mean when I have been talking with them, with the people in charge, I have been working with them. Okay, they say for us is you have to see where first start and don't see what is the end of the fair. They are big, big, big. Yeah. And what is the benefit of that? That you have many sellers. So you have many points, they sell the same fruits. And that makes that between them, they have competition. Okay. And the price, also the price change during the day, because when they first start, they have the price higher. If they see that they cannot sell everything, they start to lower the price. Yeah. So that make also that the low income families, and I'm thinking especially if you have a large family, they like to go there because they can purchase plenty of things much, much cheaper than going to the grocery store. Now the problem is in some cases, the quality, it is not the same quality, of course, that you can find in the grocery store. Yes. And finally, thing that I also like to add, the other problem that we have with that they all have a conflict with the city council. Why? Because they say, well, you are stopping our street. It's not easy to circulate. They cannot move the cars around. So they always have fight with the kids, and they don't have necessary, they don't pay taxes for the city council. So for the city council, they want people go to the formal stores and buy there. But please.
There are also a few papers that discuss, like, so in the case of Chile, in the context of free trade agreements, right, and discuss the effect of FTAs on consumer choice and consumer health. So they often suggest that, you know, signing more FTAs is associated with higher consumption of red meat, higher consumption of sugar-sweetened beverages, less consumption of fruit and vegetables. Do you think that's partially what's driving things here, or is this like a change in consumer preferences that might have happened anyway?
Yeah, that topic that you were mentioning is a very important topic now in Chile, because in the press there are people talking about that. Okay, we export fruits to many other countries. Why we don't keep the fruit here? Like many of the people who are here, they say, well, that is not possible, doesn't make any sense. But people that doesn't have our background feel certain sense of that. Yeah. So we are staying with the fruit that is not nice, and they sell our nicest fruits to the Chinese or to the people in other countries. Yeah. And now, in order to answer your question, I have been working on that in the cherry industry. Why the cherry industry? Because the cherry industry 10 years ago was nothing in Chile. And now is one of the most important products. You will be talking probably about that. Yeah. So one of the most important products, fresh fruits that Chile export, mainly to China. Yeah. So I say, well, are we people of Chile eating more cherries after that? And I have been trying to have the data. I don't have much data on that, okay? But I have been found that yes, there are more people eating cherry in Chile. We don't eat the same cherries that people eat in China because we cannot afford the price of the pounds that people pay in China. But we eat that cherry that is joined with another cherry that is not in the same color, but tastes perfectly okay.
Any other question? No, I'd like to ask a question. You mentioned obviously three factors such as the economic barriers, physical barriers, and you were in to my knowledge, introducing mental access, right? So you need to have also. How do you, in terms of research, how do you measure or how do you define the mental access? And now in terms of policy, how would you implement a policy that addresses that or improve the mental access to consume fruits and vegetables?
Yeah, of course that like any country in the world, it's not that I have the answers. I'm coming here with the questions. So hopefully you will have the answers. Yeah. But I think that the first step, like the quantitative background, will always tell me, first you have to know how to measure it. And once you measure it, okay, you have to create an intervention and measure what is the effect of that intervention. Okay. Now, if you tell me now, in order to answer the question and not try to go to the side, okay, I think that mental access has several parts. It's not just a single thing. Okay, one of the part probably is the numbers of years that people go to college, go to school. Okay, that is part of this. But also, other part that is relevant is if the person knows how to cook. Yeah, because if you don't know how to cook, that is not a problem for the fruits, but it's a problem for the vegetable. Which brings me to a subject that every time that we talk about fruit and vegetable, we are putting two things together that are very different. Because with the fruits, every time that we pick a fruit, we are thinking about certain things, and the fruits have sugar. And the vegetable doesn't have sugar, but you need to know how to cook them. That is it's very difficult. So that means that takes us to the question how we can measure someone that knows how to cook. That there is also it is a subject I am doing certain things around. Yes. So there are many topics that are possible to talk. Yeah. And finally, I say, in order to have a mental access for a kid, I will say that we also need to work with the parents, because I am a father of a 6-year-old boy, and I'm certain that he copied me all the bad things and the good things. So if he doesn't see me cooking, he doesn't see me eating fruits and vegetables, it's difficult that he will start eating them.
Thank you, Andres.
So in that way, I found that very, very interesting, this correlation between fruit consumption, BMI, and education level. And in that case, I consider myself a paradox because I'm clearly overweight and I eat a lot of fruits and vegetables. So I don't know, like there is no easy answer to that.
Psychologists on that. It seems to me like when you say mental access, you mean education, right? That affects your mental, how you think about food and you see it and what you choose. So a lot of that can be affected by education, but also psychologists. They've done a lot of research in that area about part of your brain stage together. And so it's not all that simple.
Yeah.
Definitely. Why some people are alcoholics and some are not. We all see alcohol, but some people get drawn to it. So it's a part of the brain, perhaps. There's a lot of research done on that. So it can be a lot more hard science than the soft science.
Yeah, I think, yes. But I think that just the fact that we are talking about that is our first step, is the objective of this conversation. Now, I'm not certain how we can measure it. And probably we will need to have a set of tools, not just a single tool that will help us to measure mental access.
Plus a lot of exogenous variables that have to come into that too. Beyond income and education.
Yep. And this is part of our endless effort to understand how consumers behave and how we can implement public policies according to that to have a healthier population, because now obesity is now the silent pandemic. And definitely this is an interesting topic, as I said at the beginning, fruit and vegetable consumption as part of a healthy diet. So as I said at the start, we learned a few aspects what's happening in Chile. Next, we will move from south to north, and now we'll see the example of what's been happening in Mexico. And as Andres was pointing out, both Chile and Mexico are fruit and vegetable exporting countries. They are actually powerhouses on that. So it's really interesting to know what's been happening also in their domestic market, and to have a view on what's been happening recently on Mexico. We have Belén Avendaño. She's a professor at the Economics and International Relations faculty of the Autonomous University of Baja California. Her research work focuses on the adoption of standards and the implementation of technological innovations in agriculture, with emphasis on food and safety and corporate social responsibility. So Belén, the floor is yours.
Oh, short one. Good afternoon, and thank you very much for having me. This is very nice invitation from our friend Andres, and to share this with ERS also. So I'm gonna make a broad and given some data of what was the impact of the pandemic of COVID-19 on the Mexican householders' consumption on vegetables and fruit. And I don't want to make this much longer because we just have 50 minutes, something like that. So I'm gonna skip some things. No, we all know that there can be expected some effects of a pandemic on food security, as Andres mentioned it. The food security is determined or is defined by FAO as the availability of good produces for the families in a country. It doesn't matter if it came from abroad or it's growing on the country. But we all know that in the short term, there is some concerns about if the people that are locked down and for a pandemic like happened with COVID, it's guaranteed or not, was one of the main concerns of the FAO. And there is going to be some income lost for the families due to the restrictions of the activities that for the activity that can be working and which ones that were not considered as essential for the economy, like restaurants and all the services that happen like in Mexico and other countries, like in the United States too. And these restrictions lead to generate more employment for the people, for the families. And that the impact on the demand side or in the supply will depend much more on the structure of the countries and the trade and the income inequality or external factors as energy or credit markets, among others. Like one of the questions that the gentleman has asked before was referred to if trade will increase or not the consumption of fruit and vegetables, and it will depend. Like in Mexico, we produce our sufficiency index is more than 100, so it allowed us to export and to supply enough for our people, for our families. So trade, it's very important in this kind of things. And the distortions on the supply chains will depend on the domestic or the global integration or type of products. If it's a short or a long chain, in like for fruit and vegetables, it most of the times is the short chain that it's almost all the ingredients that you need are supplied by the same country, and so you don't have to move long distances, or it doesn't take so much more time. So, but all of these has an impact on the people they living. So one of the things that we want to see from the global perspective is that the global economic recession will increase poverty, hunger, and other forms of food insecurity. And there will be a decrease of the purchase capacity for the families and change on diets. And this change on the consumption patterns and can be related to the use of foods, like the substitution of the nutritive, expensive products for cheaper food. They have more content of saturated fats, sugar, sodium, and calories, no? Or like you are leaving meat because it's so expensive, and you are going to eggs or to the other proteins that are cheaper. And these are the kind of things that were expected to be on the families since as the impact of the pandemic. So we try to see just in a general form what was this impact on food consumption of the pandemic, including change on fruit and vegetables during the lockdown. Well, all of us know what the lockdown is and when the time it was 20, almost all 20 and part of 21. So that's because I took out the chair, the lamina. Okay, so I just used 3 inquirers in Mexico. One is the National Inquirer on income and spending of the households for 2016, 18, and 2020. And another one was the telephonic inquiry about COVID-19 and the labor market. It's named a COVID ML 2020. And the other one is Equide. It's an inquiry that is made by the Universidad Iberoamericana with a fund of other international organizations in order to follow the impact of COVID. But I'm not going too much into this. Well, about that income, what happened with the pandemic? In April, in May, June, and July from 2020, there was this telephone inquiry asking people if their income decreased, it stayed the same, equal, or it was increased, or if they receive or don't receive any income. So as you can see, there was a lot of people in Mexico, 46% say they were, their income was decreased. And for July, the percentage haven't changed a lot. It stayed in the 42%. Half of the people, we can say, said that their income was equal, they didn't experience any changes. And 2% of the people doesn't receive any income, so they live on the daily basis. And just 1% says that it increased. Maybe they were selling, you know, all the alcohol and the mask and everything. Okay, so that tells you that the magnitude of this is half of your population has lost their employ or lowered their salary, their wage. So it was very preoccupant of this situation. No? And you know, this is the distribution, the structure of the income that the ENIC measures, and in order to know what are the main source of income for families in Mexico. And as you can see, the current average income, which is the the first column, it says that during the period from 2016 to 2018, the income just been decreased on a 4.2%. And then you can add another 5.8% that decreased from 2018 to 2020. So the income from Mexicans, they were shrinking since 2020. So that was not good news for Mexicans. And there were some changes on all other source of incomes for Mexico, no? Like the property income, like the rent was diminished a lot too. And some from other current incomes is like if you can ask someone for a loan or something like that, it was diminished all of that. And then, if we see this information by the deciles of families, you know, there are the 10 deciles for the families in Mexico. You can see as in general, we have a decrease of 5.8, but all the deciles except one, the number one, get a decrease on their income, and the greater amount was for the 19 and the 10 deciles. The people that has more income has also the bigger loss. And what about the spending for the families and by the sale? Well, in terms of the expenditure of the families, for all the families, it was diminished or decreased in 12.9%. And then you can see it was like a different amount for each decile, but also it was the biggest loss for the biggest deciles. Okay. And how do they spend their money? And the first category that we have here is the food, beverage, and tobacco. That this category it keeps the 38% of the share of the household, the Mexican households. So this is a very important part, and it's very huge. I don't know which the part that is from Americans or in Chile, but for Mexico, if you have to spend the 38% in food, it's a lot. Mm-hmm. But what happened here, and what we can see here, is that the households, the Mexican households, has to sacrifice some education and recreation in order to comply with their health necessities, which took 40%. And dress and footwear also went down. Well, you were locked down, you needed so much, but you had to spend, to restructure your spend in order to get the family going. And what happened in fruits? It's the only category that doesn't decrease. This increase, and it was like something like what is happening, And there was so much information around the consumption of fruit and vegetables during the lockdown, because it was saying that you should eat healthy in order to strengthen your immune system, in order to get the fight to the COVID. And this increase for all the deciles for the 10 deciles, but this doesn't happen for the fruits, for the vegetables. In terms of vegetables, the increase only were referred to the sales 9 and 10, but the sacrifice of the expenditure in vegetables was just not as big as in other categories. It was like 10 or 9%. It depends on the sales. Okay, And in conclusions, the lockdown and the restraint of non-essential activities and the lack of a public policy during the pandemic, we didn't have any check. We didn't have any help. We didn't have anything. You have to do what you have to do. Some families said that they needed to get to work another member of the family in order to get more income and or to loan to get a loan from some relatives or to get go to that's casa de empeño, a pawn shop in order to get some more income. And
we have a request if you can lower the camera so that it sees more of you. I don't know.
oh, too late. I'm finished. Sorry. Okay, and we have this unemployment and this decrease on the household income. And what is more noticed is that we have this constraint on the income of the Mexican families, and we are reaching levels that we haven't seen since 2016. So we're going to have a very hard time because inflation in Mexico is still going up, and it's getting so hard on fruit and vegetables. So it's not a good prognostic for, and it's not a good forecast for the Mexican families, but it's what we got. So thank you very much.
Any questions for Helen? I know that, for example, Mexico has one of the highest per capita consumption of many fruits, including, for example, avocados, whereas in the US, it's been a success story in terms of how many consumers have been eating more avocados. Like per capita consumption has increased from 4 pounds in 2010 to over 9 pounds in 2021. And if you think that's high, in Mexico, the average per capita consumption is close to 20 pounds.
20 pounds.
Per year. So now, this elevated demand has obviously impacted prices, and now I think Mexican consumers are struggling to afford and buy enough fruits, including, for example, avocados.
Yeah, it is. Lemon has been up, and we are like the lemon country because we use lemon in everything and in all foods. So as we are really dealing with that, it's going to be a hard time. So you say we have so much fruits, but in some areas, in some regions of Mexico, not in all. And like in northern Mexico, we have to pay a lot, and we have to pay higher prices because sometimes our fruit and vegetables go export to the United States and re-import to Mexico, and we have to buy them there and in Tijuana or in all the borders. So it's very hard. So.
Thank you, Belen.
Okay.
Well, definitely during the lockdowns, we've had different trends. For example, in the US, now moving, our next presenter will be Stephen and Will from the ERS in USDA. And we observed something starting from the pandemic. You remember 2 years ago, many economists were trying to predict what shape will the economic recovery will take. So you had some people thinking that it was going to be a U shape or double U shape or V shape or things like that. And some even were mentioning that probably we'll have a K-shaped economic recovery, which I think that's been happening, which means we have not only non-homogeneous recovery across household incomes, but we have divergent trends in terms of income levels and consumption levels, particularly in fruits and vegetables. What I'm referring to is that higher income households in the US, starting with the lockdowns, they had many of us that didn't lose our jobs, and we were spending less on services, obviously. We had higher disposable income. And that segment of the population were still demanding premium items, including fruits, vegetables. So that means berries, avocados, or more premium items, and also including organics. And on the other hand, like the 40% of lower income households, they were losing their jobs or having lower incomes. So you have higher income households having even the higher disposable income, and lower income households being impacted in a more severe way by the lockdowns and pandemic. And they were definitely looking for more value items in the store. Right now, we've seen this increasing polarization, at least that's how I'm saying. And if you look at the penetration of how many households buy fruits and vegetables in the US, for example, for many fruits and vegetables, like 40, 50, or 60% of the US households buy or report that are buying fruits in any given year. And you have, probably that is highly correlated with income. And we will see in the next presentation what's been happening in particular with one of my favorite fruits, which is blueberries. And we have Steven Saniser, who is an agricultural economist with the US Department of Agriculture's Economic Research Service. And his research focuses on the relationship between the food systems of the United States and countries in Latin America. We also have, for the second part of this presentation, we will have Will Johnson. He's an economist also at the USDA's ERS in the International Trade and Development branch. He works on a variety of topics, including import competition, exchange rate fluctuations, trade agreement, and demographic change. So I will set the microphone to Steven.
Well, thank you. I was getting text that people who are watching online are sort of seeing truncated versions of us. So I'm not sure if this is better or worse, but I'll try to stand up as I'm doing this. And I wanted to say that this is a project involving not just Will and me, but also our ERS colleagues, Greg Steele and Constanza Valdez. Let's see if there's... Wanted to thank Andres for the invitation to participate and organizing the session, and also David for co-organizing the session. I really appreciate having the chance to share a little bit about what we're doing in this area. Wanted to emphasize that this is a work in progress, and as we get into the presentation, you'll see, you'll sort of understand why it's a work in progress. Part of that is reflected in how our focus has shifted. Andres's original challenge to all of us was to sort of think about non-conventional determinants of demand. And, you know, I always think of how it was in microeconomics or macroeconomics of thinking about income and the price of the good and the price of substitutes and complements and taste changing and things like that. And we thought that given the way that blueberries are supplied to the US, that there are sometimes a year where imports are predominant, others where domestic production is predominant, that we'd look at that as a possible determinant of demand. And our idea was to pair two types of data that I don't think are used together very often, if at all. One is monthly shipment data. Our sister agency, the USDA Agricultural Marketing Service, has monthly shipment data for a variety of fruits and vegetables that are really quite cool to look at. And the other thing is household scanner data. And those show purchases by households of all sorts of goods. We just focus on blueberries in this project, and then see if we could knit the data together in some way so that we could find out if there are relationships between imports share of shipments and determinants of demand. We look at just 2 years in this preliminary presentation based on the most recent 2 years of scanner data. And one of the things that's happening is that our focus is actually shifting away from our original intent, and that we found ourselves looking at more traditional determinants of income, such as of demand, such as price and income. This is a topic that you could have many, many puns, including it's being very interesting, turnover in the blueberry sector. Someone suggested having something from Willy Wonka, and the young person stretches out into be a big blueberry. But we'll try to keep the rest of it serious. Our outline is that we have 4 basic parts. We want to provide some background information on the sector. We wanted to show how we're really aiming for a stylized representation of blueberry supply, knitting together the 2 data sources. Wanted to share with you some aggregate information on household blueberry purchases based on the scanner data that we've looked at so far. And then finally, just to give you a little taste of what the scanner data look like with respect to specific demographic features. And just, yes. And this time just fresh. The data is there for frozen, but we just wanted to keep it simple to start with. Yeah. So I'll let Will talk for a little bit, and then I'll come up and do the last half.
So thank you, Stephen. I'll echo Stephen's thanks to Andres and David, and thanks to all of you for being here. So David mentioned that blueberries are one of his favorite fruits. Even if you disagree, you can hopefully agree that blueberries are still very interesting in the context of the US, because as you can see here, in the past couple of decades, there has been really tremendous growth in the blueberry market in the US. This graph is plotting total blueberry availability, domestic and imports. But breaking that down into domestic versus imports, you can see that over the past few decades, there has been substantial growth in domestic production in the US of blueberries, but much more dramatic are the growth of imports. You can see in the year 2000, US imports of blueberries it's a very small number, and in fact, the US was actually a slight net exporter of blueberries. Fast forward to now, and imported blueberries are roughly equal in magnitude as domestic blueberries in the US. And this growth in imports of blueberries, that story is largely a seasonality story. As Stephen hinted, a big part of what's going on here is that here in the US, domestic production of blueberries peaks in June. It's also strong in the few months before and after that. But your American farmers are not going to have much luck selling blueberries outside of that. But we're able to make up that difference by importing blueberries from Latin America in the other months of the year, especially Mexico, Chile, and Peru. One pattern you see is if you look at prices across the year, more precisely unit values, there is a peak in prices of imported blueberries in the US in March and April, and then October and November, when that's when neither the US nor our countries that we're importing from are producing as much blueberries. And this international trade of blueberries is, from the US perspective, is by far a story of imports, not exports. Exports have grown slightly, but now in recent years, US imports of blueberries, US trade in blueberries, 92% of that is imports in terms of value, 87% in terms of volume. One thing I should clarify before I hand it off to Stephen to talk about the scanner data is that the graph that I showed you a few slides ago from 2021, in 2021 happened to be a year where there was remarkably consistent availability of blueberries throughout the year, thanks to imports. That may be the new normal. It's too early to say. That may be an anomaly. We're going to be using data from 2019 and 2020, where there's more variation across the months in blueberry availability. And that's going to be advantageous for us when we look at the scanner data, because the scanner data do not distinguish between imported versus domestic blueberries. So in order to investigate the determinants of demand for blueberries and whether there's differences in imports versus domestic, we're going to be looking at the data, how they vary across the calendar year. And so, Stephen, and now Stephen will talk about some of our preliminary findings with the IRI scanner data.
Did you say where the imports are coming from?
Yes, the three largest countries are in order. Number 1, Mexico. Number 2, Peru, which recently surpassed number 3, Chile.
So what percentage come from Mexico?
That's mainly during the spring, and I would say like there used to be like 2 shoulders of the season, the transition between North American production and South American production. Chile being the traditional supplier of blueberries during the our winter, and with 2 big gaps in our spring and during the fall, what they call the shoulders of the season, and you saw how prices were spiking. And now Mexico is supplying, particularly during the spring, competing directly with Florida production and with Georgia production from Georgia as well. And whereas Peru is supplying and having increasing overlap with the latest part of the US season, particularly during September, October, November. And then we have the traditional imports coming from Chile during the winter.
So what areas in Mexico do they grow most of the blueberries? Is that near the US border? Or?
No, most of that is central Mexico, like in similar spaces as where they grow avocados. There are some areas where they have same that crop mix of avocados, berries, but increasingly in the Pacific Northwest in Mexico, the state of Sinaloa, where they grow a lot of traditionally a lot of fresh tomatoes, and also in Baja a little bit.
And is that greenhouse or?
It's
Most of that now, about half of that is in high tunnels, and increasingly is grown not planted in soil, but also increasingly in bags and pots with drip irrigation. And there has been a revolution in the blueberry industry, but now the better genetics, higher yields, better fruit quality, things like that. But I'm still in Steven's on the.
Do have a chemically intensive way of producing blueberries?
In terms of the ag inputs that they need, yes, but also they have an increasing proportion of organic blueberries.
And then water intensive, does it need the water?
Not as much as you compare to other permanent crops, yeah.
So what I'm trying to get at, like with climate change, would that affect, are we going to expect some changes in blueberry production from Mexico coming our way?
Well, but we've seen relevant transition in the blueberry industry has been the inception of not only high chill cultivars with better genetics, but also low chill or even no chill cultivars. So they don't require chill hours anymore. Some of those cultivars. So now that's why they are now able to grow them in Peru, closer to the equator.
And one other question, I promise. And is it storage friendly? Like how tolerant it is? It has to be refrigerated, but it's or chilled, then it's shipped, right?
Yes, as soon as it's harvested, they send it to the pre-cooling facilities, and then it has longer shelf life compared to other berries such as strawberry, blackberry, raspberries. But the age of the fruit is definitely
So what I'm
important.
trying to get at, the gas price changes, this has an effect on the price.
That has definitely impacted the cost. For example, bringing from Chile, bringing from Peru, the ocean container rates have been, obviously that everybody knows that it's been really expensive. And most of that has definitely impacted the cost. Part of that is being, operators have been able to pass on that to consumers, but most of the cost increases have been absorbed in along the supply chain.
One thing I wanted to add, the importance of growing areas in the state of Jalisco, which, with at least the blueberries is, sort of the start of the Mexican blueberry sector, now, what, a good 10, 15 years ago. So from this point on, I wanted to share with you some of the things that we learned from the scanner data. And one thing that we didn't think about, and we should have really thought about this in advance, was for a consumer, most consumers buying blueberries is a discrete decision, not one that one does quietly or privately, but that one buys, 0 containers of blueberries, 1 container of blueberries, 2, sometimes more than 2. My mom sometimes goes on a bender and buys 3. But you're not going to buy 1.67 pints of blueberries. And, the typical package is, usually a plastic container, a dry pint of blueberries. I read somewhere, if the internet can be trusted, there are 274 blueberries on average in a pint. One could buy a quart package. I think sometimes you'll see half pints, but that's more like for raspberries and blackberries or stuff. So it's, it's different. It's a different type of market. In the scanner data that we looked at, about 3/4 of the purchases were just a single pint. And that has really great ramifications for the data, because the expenditures on blueberries and the price per package on blueberries, they move in tandem up and down. So it's hard to distinguish them, but you can see these cycles across the time of the year, and they correspond a little bit with when domestic production is available or not available. The higher prices one sees in March and April, which is the very early part of when domestic production is coming online, tends from the southeast, and then October and November, which is the first part of the fall where there are hardly any domestically produced blueberries on the market. And we don't show you the unit value data here. Will showed it a little bit earlier, but you see sort of a very similar cyclical pattern in there across the year. So what we're trying to do is to sort of match up the shipment data and the scanner data so that one can look at each month as being distinct. And there are some parts of the year, roughly January through March, where the vast majority of blueberries are imported blueberries. And then you have 4 months in the center part of the year, roughly from April to July, include a little bit of August there, where domestic production is predominant. And then you have the fall months where it has to be an imported blueberry. And our thinking is that perhaps through looking at the data, perhaps through econometric evidence, that we would be able to see that the month of the year is a significant factor on people's consumption of blueberries. For instance, do consumers view blueberries in June and July, when it's almost certain to be a domestic blueberry and the price is low, to be different from an August, September blueberry? It's more likely to be an imported blueberry, but the prices are also likely to be low. So that's the sort of empirical trap that we're trying to set up. So I'd like to show you some of the other data that we have. These are the weekly number of households in the sample purchasing blueberries. And in this case, the data are not weighted. And you can see that there is some responsiveness in consumers in deciding, am I going to buy blueberries or not, in terms of the number buying is going up and down during the course of the year. The center part of the year, when domestic production is available, that's really when consumption is at one of its high levels, although not necessarily the absolute high. And the downturns coincide with those periods of high prices that we saw in the unit value data and in the scanner data. If you're wondering what this big drop off is at the end of the year, that's sort of like the rump year, the rump month week in the data, where there might be a 53rd week that has 3 days and it shows up and it's part of the calendar year that's ending. This is the weekly number of purchases measured in packages. Well, I think the other one was expenditures. Again, you see a very, very similar thing. We had to go through a little bit of mathematics by multiplying the average household expenditure on blueberries by the total number of households purchasing blueberries, and then dividing by the average price shown in the scatter data. But again, you see a very similar pattern in terms of the ups and downs in the sector. And you can see that the downturns are roughly from week 10 to week 18 and from week 35 to the year's end. And that coincides pretty closely with what we saw in the expenditure data and the number of households purchasing and so on. This is average weekly blueberry purchases per household. Here, as we're starting to do a little bit more with the data, the patterns, are still there, but they're less obvious than in some of the earlier ones. Scanner data include a wealth of demographic information, and we haven't quite gotten our minds around, how to assemble the data so that we have a nice panel that we could use, apply an econometric model to. Covers many of the things that I think one would normally include in a study of this type, like age, educational level, gender, race, ethnicity, marital status, hours employed. Didn't see anything about sexual orientation or one's identity. There is information about location, total income, the household stage in the life cycle, and also the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program and the Special Supplemental Nutrition Program for Women's, Infants, and Children, SNAP and WIC, respectively. There's shopping trip specific information, the date of purchase, the UPC code, which I think we can use to later on to bring also frozen blueberries in here. We might be able to distinguish by size of the container, but I'm not sure yet. So here, let me show just a few of the things where one could see, at least visually, by looking at the data and inspecting it, some possible patterns. And one is that low-income households tend to purchase more blueberries and show greater sensitivity to price than high-income households. And that's, I think, a little different from what people normally think, because one thinks that people with greater amounts of money are going to buy more blueberries. And it might be that there's some sort of relationship with other factors that explains this. It could be that the low-income households are younger households, perhaps they're just starting out. But anyhow, I found that interesting to see. We don't show in this graph comparison of the middle-income household brackets, the lower middle income and the upper middle income. Those, it was, they look very similar. The second one had to do with, Latino households versus non-Latino households. And, I was thinking back to the presidential address this morning, and there are these categories that people create for Latinos. I think the data describes Hispanic. Obviously there's a multitude of people of different national origins that are sometimes lumped together and viewed as Hispanic or Latino, but one does see that there is some pattern here, that the Latino households tend to purchase fewer blueberries than non-Latino ones. And then the question is why that is and what is exactly the Latino thing measuring here. Another one, compared Asian households to white households, and you can see during much of the year that Asian households tended to buy more blueberries and also appeared to be more sensitive to the price, seasonal price trends that we showed earlier in the presentation. We also can compare, you can divide a group into Asian households, white households, Black households. Asian households compared to African-American households also seem to purchase more blueberries. We have a comparison of African-American and white households. There, it's hard to see any difference. And I share this because the data are there. I don't have any, sort of theory or confidence or reason why I would think that households are different with respect to their blueberry consumption. And I want to learn more about how this is measured and defined in the data. So what have we learned so far? First, we've seen the impact of rising imports on consumption of blueberries, that once upon a time, blueberries were something that Americans consumed only during the summer months in fresh form and during other parts of the year in frozen form. And trade has made it possible that you can consume blueberries almost year round, and in many cases year round, almost anywhere in the United States. During the years 2019 to 21, imports constituted most of the supply from the months of August through April. And we are wondering if consumers view imported blueberries as somehow different from domestically produced blueberries, and whether we'd be able to see that in the scanner data. During the months that our scanner data are available, 2019 and 20, prices tended to be higher during the months of March and April, when imports are fewer, in September and October, when domestically produced berries tend not to be available. About 3/4 of household blueberry purchases consist of a package, most likely a dry pint, and there are close correlations as a result in weekly data of number of households purchasing blueberries, household expenditures on blueberries, and numbers of packages purchased. What we've seen so far in the scanner data, purchases fluctuated in response to price, but not necessarily in response to whether the blueberries were imported or domestically produced. Even though that was our objective to look at, I don't feel like we've gathered enough information where we can answer the question that we posed initially. Instead, what we've seen is some differences in blueberry consumption across households of different income brackets and between households headed by people of different racial and ethnic groups. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Stephen. Question for Stephen.
Yes, Samantha.
I explored some variation across states. So I used to live in Michigan. And Michigan is well very summer, and I know that when you can hear this was because they were being from Michigan to buy blueberries was a big thing. So I would expect to see some effect at the state level.
Yes, the scanner data do make it possible to look at specific locations where the consumer is. The thing that I notice is that, they tend to be metro areas and in the list of identifiers. But, what you sort of suggest is also what our colleague Constanza Valdez suggests, is that you could have some parts of the country where blueberries are grown and people really know blueberries, and over time that's gotten concentrated with changes in the structure of rural America. My dad, growing up in Western Pennsylvania, remembers having wild bushes on their property and going out with members of their farm to pick blueberries. you know, Pennsylvania is not a big blueberry state, but, you know, I think of Michigan, the Blueberry Festival in Marquette, and people going out and picking or buying large quantities in that time, and also knowing what to do with blueberries in addition just to eating them directly, but putting them into baked goods and things.
And I guess it could be compounded because, you know, when Michigan blueberries come up in June or July, at the same time that prices are lower.
Mhm.
How would you disentangle whether people are buying it from Michigan?
Well, we're not in the position really to disentangle that, but what we can entangle is that we can say that a July blueberry might be different from a February blueberry, and you know, attribute that there's some connections to imports and place of production. Yeah. Yes, Andy. Oh, Linda, I'm sorry. I think it's all just UPC. Yeah, I don't think we've looked at any of the random weight data. We know it's there. Sheeta, I did. What is your question?
Well, the observation therefore is that from your graphs, that the ethnic groups that you study, that you graph their purchases, is that correct, that the variation is a lot higher?
Yes, with some of the, you know, you do see greater variability as well as a similar tracking. And Greg has done some you know, measurements of the variability, but we didn't include them in the presentation.
What is the conclusion from all those, on the understanding of those graphs and trying to market blueberries? Marketing implications to different regions in the US with different ethnic group competition?
Well, in terms of targeting, you know, particular, you know, ethnic groups or you know, I don't think that we have enough information there to really say that, in part because, you know, I don't know, we don't know whether, you know, we're picking up something, for instance, in the comparison between Asian and non-Asian households that really has to do with, is this because they're Asian, or is it because their educational level is different, or the income level is different, or some interaction of all those things. So, you know, I just am real cautious to say that. But one thing that you do see is this question about, and David, and we've talked about this, you know, in the days coming up at the conference, is that for the consumer, you want to be confident that whenever you buy a blueberry, that it's going to be a really good box of blueberries. And if you end up having, you know, sort of a dud, you know, things where they're no longer fresh, or you know, you get into the bottom and you find that they're all squished, or you find one that's growing mold or something, and then you get really like, well, gee, that was a bummer. I'm not going to buy blueberries for a while. And then also that, and I see this in my parents, you know, that they have stylized facts about the reliability of certain blueberries. So my mom has really good experiences with Peru blueberries. She thinks that Peru have the primo blueberries of all the things that are available. And that might not be true, but that's my mom's conclusion. My dad has a very negative conclusion about the blueberries from a particular state in the United States, which may or may not be true. But, you know, from the industry standpoint, is you want to remove that uncertainty so that it sort of smooths out. And you're starting to see, I think, especially in the 2021 shipment data that Will shared, that they might be getting to this point where they've ironed out some of the price differences and ironed out the supply variability across months. And that's actually, you know, quite an impressive. I don't know. That's what I'd say. I know that the ITC study of Blueberries got in a little bit into profitability, but they have access to confidential information that we don't. Yes, Linda.
Just supermarket scanner data, looking at different types of stores, if they know this is the anecdotal stores, but when I go to Costco, I can get the beautiful box of blueberries all year round.
Mhm.
That's what changed all that much. Because it's very nice to see the price changes, but if I go to the local supermarket, that might not be the case.
I think there's some store type data in there, but we haven't
Yeah.
unpacked that yet. Yes.
I'm not really surprised. Most people about blueberries. And this is something that I've done lots of online surveys and stuff myself, but I really struggle with, you know, when we ask people where do you want blueberries from, they tell us the US, but when you think about the actual blueberry packaged in the stores, the percent of people that really look at that label and see where it's from, whether they tell us they do or not. And it's so tiny, so people like me and my age can't even barely see it anymore. I think that I'm not surprised to see price taking over.
Mhm.
But I have done some surveys on blueberries before, and the mushy or the prior bad experience was hugely significant for the first like the next 30 days.
Hmm.
So that experience matters.
Oh, well, thank you.
I had a similar observation or question on this issue of imported versus local. Is your hypothesis that consumers are aware that something in certain months are imported and in certain months they are domestic? And is that just sort of like a common knowledge, or it's associated with the packaging, and that you think consumers are smart enough to read and have that knowledge?
It's a hypothesis, so we don't come with the story written already, and as you can see, we're sort of getting knocked off our original research question. But it is written on the packages, and yes. Mm-hmm. And you have detailed also, you can see particular growers and particular parts of the the country or different countries. If you were really knowledgeable, you probably could recognize the names of certain growers or certain firms. Like in strawberries, I think Driscoll's is very predominant, but I don't think that there's a correspondent to Driscoll's in the blueberry world.
Well, now recently they have the QR code where consumers can scan it, and they can even tell you the story about where it was produced, and you can tell you family farm story, things like that.
Mhm. Okay.
If we want to look at the age cohort effect, because I know you're not publishing things. When we were younger and starting out in the consumer marketplace, we didn't eat blueberries in November, October. We just didn't buy them. So there's a perception that, what about this lingering perception? Well, it's always going to be fresh and quiet in the summer, because these blueberries are summer food, whereas people who have started out with consumer days and years used to this kind of having year-round blueberries. I just find that so both of you are maybe more sensitive thinking of the seasonality when they're going to be fresher.
Mm-hmm.
Not that they aren't fresher, but that's just the perception.
Yeah, you could have generational perceptions there. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's one of on our to-do list of things to explore. Well, thank you all the presenters. Just to wrap up, I would say we have discussed all these elements, psychological elements, some other more observable factors that determine whether you buy fresh fruits and vegetables or not. And I think I will summarize some of these factors with the results from a recent survey. Now that we're in an inflationary environment, in the US, they found that about 45%
of their responders, at least in this survey, they said that they are planning to buy less fruits and vegetables because of the cost of all food and all items across the board, it's going up. So with this telling you that is quite a sensitive segment of the market. However, if you look at the bright side, we have 55% of consumers that they say they will continue to buy the same amount of fruits and vegetables no matter what. So what is now the interesting point is that 55% is highly correlated with what? Like with the consumers that buy no matter what, with cultural aspects, economical aspects, and they are planning to buy still 55% of consumers. So if that is highly correlated with the consumers that buy in a normal way, I'm trying to think from an industry perspective that the demand will still be there. But definitely, this is a very exciting segment, and we will continue with the discussion. And I will just thank you all for being here, and thank you for all the presenters. Thanks.